Wounded invisibility. Look, I bear a wound that is not yet healed, my ambition to make an impression. C.G. Jung said that in the Black Book, number 2. Most of us need attention and acknowledgment. We want to be seen and welcomed into others' perceptual fields. We may want to light up the back rows with our sparkling and radiant presence, but admiring attention is not always available. Others may be wrapped up in their own need for attention, the hardships of their lives, their depressions, anxieties, and obsessions, so there isn't always a surfeit of attention to focus on us. Wanting to be the center of attention is a want, probably not a need. We are the star of our movie, but it's so easy to forget that other people are the stars of their movies. Sometimes there is value in being seen, and at other times in being cloaked. The desire for attention can cause us to seek to be more visible than is good for us. We forget the advantages of invisibility because we experience the invisibility as a wound. Deng Ming Dao, a modern Taoist sage, writes, "Useful trees are cut down, useless ones survive. The same is true of people. The strong are conscripted. The beautiful are exploited. Those who are too plain to be noticed are the ones who survive. They are left alone and safe. But what if we ourselves are among such plain persons? Though others may neglect us, we should not think of ourselves as being without value. We must not accept the judgment of others as the measure of our own self-worth. Thus, to be considered useless is not a reason for despair, but an opportunity. It is the chance to live without interference and to express one's own individuality." And that concludes the Deng Ming Dao quote. There can be authentic suffering involved with not being seen, and narcissistic longing for attention may be a necessary part of human incarnation. We are social mammals, and scarcity of attention can be as much of a hardship as the scarcity of other primal needs, like all those studies of infants in orphan hospitals that finds that if they're not given enough attention and picked up enough, many will just die. But it may also be up to us to choose our perception of invisibility, and there are many ways to perceive and interpret it. We can experience it as a wound, as victimizing circumstance, as a mixed blessing, or as a useful power of cloaking. There can be authentic suffering involved with not being seen, and narcissistic longing for attention may be a necessary part of human incarnation. We are social mammals, and scarcity of attention can be as much of a hardship as the scarcity of other primal needs, like all the myriad studies that show that people, especially older people lacking companionship, have shorter lifespans and worse outcomes with every kind of health thing. But it may also be up to us to choose our perception of invisibility, and there are many ways to perceive and interpret it. We can experience it as a wound, as victimizing circumstance, as a mixed blessing, or as a useful power of cloaking. I often find myself reaching for more attention, and if I get it, the heightened attention can be the caffeinated stimulant of enhanced self-importance, or it can be the deep fulfillment of mutual and authentic acknowledgment, or a mixture of both, and still other things. Many assume that narcissism is always pathological, and I should add that in the last couple of years, people are now using the term narcissist, this drives me crazy, to mean like full-blown sociopathic, malignant narcissistic personality disorder. And that is a complete misunderstanding of the term. This is the age of the narcissistic personality type. Most of us are that personality type. Stop using narcissist to mean that someone is a total acting out sociopath. That's just not, that just levels of very important distinction. There's a huge spectrum of narcissism. Many assume that narcissism is always pathological, and indeed it can be. It has been for me the most difficult of pitfalls, an enemy with a million slippery masks and guises, a manic depressive trickster leading me into endless mirror worlds. Some of these mirror worlds are concave and magnify my grandiosity, while other mirror walls are convex and shrink my sense of self worth. When I enter the mirror worlds, I tend to forget the distortions and optical illusions. I forget that being visible to others means being bound up in their state of consciousness, moods, projections, and obsessions. I forget that I am often at my most empowered when I am most invisible. And we know that celebrity, especially if it's rock star celebrity, actually shortens the lifespan. So there's a lot of risks, especially nowadays with all the deep fakes and doxing of folks uh, and so forth, stirring up stuff in social media about celebrities. It's dangerous to be a celebrity. When I purposely wake up in the early hours of the morning before dawn to do creative work in complete seclusion, I often rediscover magical invisibility. The early hours of the morning can be a time of maximal invisibility as the attention of others in your community slumbers in the dream time. More distant from the field of mundane attention, emerging from the dream time while it's still dark, the pre dawn hours can be a time of magical and fertile invisibility. But I've also found an evolutionary core within the pathologized scar tissue of narcissism. Narcissism can also be a primary organismic urge toward the glorified body, toward an expanded ability to enter the welcoming perceptual field of others, an urge toward new telepathies, a species wide urge that expresses itself in so many ways, from ever more advanced communication technologies to the neurotic longing to be a celebrity. So once I heard a voice that asked me, like, what is the positive and evolutionary side of narcissism? And a moment later, I recognized an answer that it comes from an actually an it's a pathologized version of an evolutionary longing to be able to more potently enter the welcome perceptual field of others, which would be possible with the new means of communication, which is a feature of the singularity archetype. You can see my video looking across the event horizon or read the book Crossing the Event Horizon, all free on the website to understand that better. And everything that the singularity archetype points to as a future evolutionary possibility, like an expanded telepathic and visual means of communication, is a phenomenological actuality in near death experience, because these are the two event horizons, parallel event horizons, that the singularity archetype is about: death and species wide metamorphosis. So the if you think about like the perfect narcissistic fantasy, say like wanting to be Jimi Hendrix playing searing guitar chords to a stadium full of young admiring hotties or something like that, it's an image of a direct energetic transmission of the self into the welcome perceptual field of others. The fact that this is frustrated, this latent capacity in us is frustrated by the fact that we mostly communicate by making these small mouth noises like I'm doing right now, that can paradoxically lead to a pathologizing desire to seek ever more attention, to, you know, be a spotlighted rock star wearing a sequined outfit so that you're like glowing and sparkling out there and reaching as with your amplified voice as many people as powerfully as possible. So it's important to see that there's an evolutionary drive behind that. And this is a species wide urge that expresses itself in so many ways, from our more advanced communication technologies to the neurotic longing to be a celebrity. So I think when they interviewed uh, black teenagers, they found that you can look up the study. I don't have it in front of me, but they asked them if they would want to be what was more important, to be smarter, healthier, stronger, um, or famous, and a very large percentage, the the highest percentage, said famous. Revising this card in 2024, I have more personal experience to add. In 2020 to 2023, I was finally able to complete my highest life mission for 45 years and publish my sci fi fantasy epic based on the discoveries I made in 1978. Parallel Journeys. You can read it free on this website, but it's also available as a physical book, as a Audible. I think that's the best form of it, or Kindle on Amazon. But it's beautifully displayed on the website, so you don't have to buy anything. Um, as I was working on it, I indulged in many fantasies about its future recognition, like writing my own reviews kind of stuff. I knew it was a narcissistic sugar rush. I knew it was like a dangerous thing to do, as um, it would increase disappointment if these recognition fantasies weren't fulfilled, as they have not been. Though the people who have read it, if you check the reviews, have had high praise for it, including at least one famous writer. But no, it has not gone anywhere on the bestseller list or anything like that. Only a tiny group of people actually read it or buy it. But I felt at the time, and still do, that these narcissistic fantasies of success were overall beneficial because they helped to motivate me um, during those final 3 years of 7-day-a-week work, a lot of it during the lockdown, uh, to keep going while facing tremendous mechanical resistance, publishing it in every form you could publish a book by myself, including performing the Audible book, which was tremendous mechanical resistance. It's so hard to get things into the acceptable audio standards of ACX, the company that funnels audio into Audible. Um, and so overall, I feel it was worth it as a motivational thing. Nevertheless, there have been struggles to accept a lack of recognition of parallel journeys and my work in general. You get to the end of a 45-year finish line, like I did with Parallel Journeys, and no cheering crowds waiting, watching as you finish, but maybe a guy walking his dog across the street looking down at his phone. My work on the singularity archetype, which began in 1978, and I had this feeling of getting recognition at the small college I went to, where the chairman of the philosophy department was giving me honors for that paper and gave a speech in front of the whole faculty about what a great discovery I'd made in this kind of thing. But then I left this tiny college and went back to live in New York City, where I was a total nobody. And my desire to to make more people aware of the singularity archetype has mostly been frustrated. And and yet the singularity archetype directly relates to the core of what's going on in both the individual life cycle and the future of the species. But I rarely get people to take it seriously. Even though I've gotten to speak to millions of people about it over the last 20 years, mostly because of being a regular guest on Coast to Coast AM, a show that once reached millions. I think it's still carried by 550 radio stations, but how many people listen to the radio anymore? I mean, I think most younger Gen Zs have probably never even seen a radio. Um, but if so, no matter how many people I get to speak to about it, few ever seem to really comprehend the significance of the singularity archetype. If you'd like to be one of them, you can see my the video I mentioned. It's linked up in the card, or my book, all free on the website. And then even only a very few of my closest friends have read more than a tiny fraction of my work. We're in an attention economy. There's only so much attention to spread around. And a lot of my friends now are Gen Z, and they read fewer books than any other generation. The generation that reads the most, surprisingly though, are millennials. These sorts of aggrieved feelings are common in creative people who are far better known than I will ever be. Carl Jung was world famous, and his collected works were or are the best-selling books ever published by University Press. Yet at the end of his life, Carl Jung felt like a prophet ignored in his own time. We are social mammals built to crave social recognition. Society tends to show how much it values your work by how much it's willing to pay for it. But my entire creative career has operated at a six-figure loss. So even though I have enough money to get by and to continue doing the work through other means, it still feels like a blow to my self-esteem not to get paid for what I do. It's like a form of acknowledgement or validation I would like. The path of shadow integration is not to pretend to be above such feelings, to dismiss them as wounded pride, even if they are wounded pride, it's still a wound, but to acknowledge the feelings as inevitable and real. So I've kind of fluctuated back and forth on this. I've tried to console myself with different aspects that I've always had the idea, and it's also implicit in Parallel Journeys, of writing for just a few key mutants and this kind of thing. But at the same time, I've also come to realize that it's important to acknowledge the disappointment too, and to honor those feelings as real, and not to pretend to myself or try and get past all that when that's not necessarily psychologically and emotionally realistic. Because as a social mammal, my creative work is my social desire for social extension. And this is something that people may not realize about creative work, is the social, what I call the social extension aspect of it. About 10 years ago or something, I had a dream where I was out at Burning Man, out in the deep playa, and I come upon this art installation, and it's kind of it's both sort of like a well, but it's also like a lighthouse. It has like a tower with like a beacon coming out, like holographically projecting something. And so I go up to it, and I look down into this optical well. There are like prisms and lenses, and what you see when you look down is I see a isolated looking Russian man alone in his garret, writing with the light of a kerosene lamp. And I realize it's an image of Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky writing his novella, Notes from Underground. The novella was very influential on me when I first encountered it at age 14. And what I'm realizing is that the art installation is showing that here's this guy who's been dead for 150 years, and who wrote this book in total isolation about feelings of isolation and alienation, hence the title, Notes from Underground. And yet, the social extension continues 150 years past his death. Right now, there's probably some college students reading that novella and feeling that no one has captured their feelings of alienation so well. And so this is an incredible thing that art um, is able to do. Writing is basically like a telepathic technology where you upload your thoughts into this written medium, and then some other human user will read them in the future and upload them into their mind. Even this videotape is like this because right now I'm alone in my study, but there's this presumption of social extension that somebody, hopefully, will be watching this in the future, and so I'm sort of when I might be dead or something, and so therefore I'm kind of socially extending myself through time, even though um, from the point of view of this moment in time, I'm like a you know, uh, an older guy alone in his study talking into a microphone and iPhone. Okay, so these sorts of aggrieved feelings in creative people, even some very well known ones, are quite common. And I'm not saying that they're good. I'm not saying that my having these feelings makes me look good. But they are ones that a lot of people deal with, and including people who are not creative and who are unseen. A lot of older people, especially like older women and stuff, will talk about walking around and they're invisible because a lot of people um, are seeing only like the young hotties as they walk down the street, and so older people become invisible. Now, I'm kind of like, wear an eccentric amount of like silver jewelry, and like there's something about me that like I've always managed to be able to like get attention, um, uh, for better or worse. So I don't experience that so chronically, but sometimes I do. I have some idea what that can feel like, and and once again, even if you were like a child star, I know some, but now you're not so well known, you can feel this sense of wounded invisibility. It's a common complaint. And I think it's especially true because we live in um, a very socially, in many ways, toxic world that's not very well suited for human nature. Let's remember that like 99.5% or so of like the time that human genetics have existed, we were hunter gatherers, and then during most of the 10,000 years of agricultural society that followed, people lived in small agrarian communities where you walk down the street. My mom grew up in a world like this, in on a 10-acre chicken farm in a small rural community in South Jersey. You walk down the street and you see Johnny, but you know his grandparents, his cousins, everything about him. But where I grew up in New York City, um, you see an endless stream of strangers, and the only things you have to go on are appearance and so forth. And so that can create a tremendous hunger for attention, because most of the time you're walking around invisible. It's just one more anonymous person, one more body streaming through the subway, as so many others are as well. I am able to transcend feelings of wounded invisibility, but let's remember that transcendence includes that which is transcended. I still have the feelings, but I don't let them keep me from persevering in the work, the creative work. The work is its own blessing, and I have deeply meaningful participation mystique moments creating it, especially uh, writing parallel journeys are some of the most fulfilling, exciting, adventurous moments of my life, even though I would be alone in this room. It does reach some people, and I've always been more interested in the quality of those who engage my work more than the quantity. the relative lack of recognition has not diminished, as far as I can tell, my relationship to the creative muse. I haven't missed a single writing session because of these feelings of wounded invisibility. And so far, the well has never been dry. I've never been able to catch up with all the creative work waiting to be done. And if I want to take a day off from like what's on the agenda, and I did that for like 2 years and 4 months of like what I called the rabbit hole writing sessions, I would wake up feeling like a washed up old man, grouchy or whatever, and, you know, make a cup of tea or whatever, turn on the computer, and then just within seconds be sucked into a rabbit hole, someplace I had no idea I was going to go. Um, and those sessions could go on for 18 hours. So there's, there are all sorts of, it's important to make downward comparisons and realize like, well, would I rather be like a non-creative person who didn't have any content that I could feel neglected about? Wouldn't that be so much worse? Of course it would be. I do realize that like I have these intensely, that the process itself, the creation of itself is an extremely rewarding thing. But on the other side of that is what Joyce Carol Oates said, that, a book that's not being read is just marks on a page. So there's that perspective, has a certain legitimacy as well. On the other hand, once something exists, even if I were the only person reading my work, it's there in the collective unconscious. Like it says in the I Ching, the right person thinking the right thoughts alone in their room may affect things thousands of miles away. But the reason why we know who Dostoevsky is because his books were widely published and distributed. And there are many other great artists who almost nobody knows about, and their work has been sort of lost in the mists of time. So these are real distinctions. And as my philosophy, dynamic paradoxicalism, says the opposite of a profound truth is another profound truth. So although there is the great reward of the act of creation itself, once the work exists, it exists in eternity because it will never not have existed and all that kind of thing. But then there is also just the very natural human desire for your work to be known, for it to be appreciated by many people, and so on. And that should really only be viewed as neurotic if it stops you from doing the work, which it does not do with me. So I feel I have to simply accept and integrate the feelings of the work not being appreciated enough. But I have not let the lack of recognition keep me from a single creative session, and my connection to the muse is still highly fulfilling. And yet I still feel the wounded invisibility. Trying to deny those feelings or glibly explaining them away as merely wounded vanity would be shadow denial and only make things worse. Even if it is wounded vanity and pride, which is certainly a huge part of it, it's still a wound. And therefore, and I cannot just think my way out of that. So I have to just accept it and keep doing the work. And so I try to compassionately accept the feelings while I relentlessly focus on persevering with the work. Invisible wounds and wounds of invisibility may become visible. But be careful about what meets your eye, because invisibility is not always what it seems. So I've added a footnote to the card recently. It was something that helped me a lot when I was struggling with the lack of parallel journeys readers. I heard something on the Lex Friedman podcast that directly addressed my feelings of disappointment about parallel journeys recognition, while at the same time noticing that it doesn't affect my high vitality daily relationship to the muse. So this was Lex Friedman podcast 318 with biologist Nick Lane, and I think we're 3 hours and 31 minutes into the podcast when Nick says, live in the moment and try to enjoy what you're doing. And that means try to go to the themes that you are most interested in and try and follow them as well as you can. And that tends to pay back in surprising ways. People will help you often if they see some light shining in your eyes. You've got to be obsessive, but if you're doing what you really love doing, it's not work anymore. It's what you do. And Lex replies, careful how you define success. Nick, you'll never find happiness in success. There's a lovely quote from Robert Louis Stevenson, I think, who said, nothing in life is as disenchanting as attainment. Lex, the true definition of success is getting to do today what you really enjoy doing, just what fills you with joy. That's ultimately success. Success isn't the thing beyond the horizon, the big trophy. Nick, I think that's as close as we can get to happiness. That's not to say you're full of joy all the time, but it's as close as we can get to a sustained human happiness is by getting some fulfillment from what you're doing on a daily basis. If what you're looking for is the world giving you the stamp of approval with a Nobel Prize or a fellowship or whatever it is, I've known people like this who are eaten away by anger, the caustic resentment that they've not been awarded this prize they deserve. Lex. And the other way, if you put too much value into those kinds of prizes and you win them, I've gotten the chance to see that it also, the more you're quote unquote successful, you are in that sense, the more you run the danger of growing an ego so big that you don't get to actually enjoy the beauty of this life. You start to believe that you've figured it all out, as opposed to, I think ultimately, the most fun thing is being curious about everything around you, being constantly surprised, and these little moments of discovery, of enjoying beauty in small and big ways all around you. And I think the bigger your ego grows, the more you take yourself seriously, the less you're able to enjoy that. Nick, amen to that. I couldn't agree more. The podcast had me thinking about a quote about fame I heard from a major celebrity who said, fame is just an empty bag. I couldn't find which celebrity said that when I searched, but there was an interesting search return. It might have been Paul Newman, but I'm not sure. So this is what I found when I tried to find that. I guess it's a little poem. Fame, that's an empty purse. Count it, go broke. Eat it, go hungry. Seek it, and go mad. And that little 4-line poem or whatever was attributed to Kroll. I'm assuming the movie, but it could be a non-famous person named Kroll. And another quote I've heard attributed to William Blake, but could not verify. Fortune is a whore ready to kiss anyone's ass. I labor upward into futurity.